Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
USPS leaders have warned Congress about financial strain, rising costs, and the possibility of service reductions, concerns that all show up first in rural delivery. That stress now collides with growing demands on the mail system, including election-related responsibilities. Congresswoman Nikki Budzinski, representing Illinois' 13th Congressional District, joins me with her thoughts on the challenges facing the Postal Service. Congresswoman Budzinski, it's so great to have you back on the show.
Great to be back with you.
I want to talk about the recent Postmaster General's testimony. He told Congress that the Postal Service is under real financial strain, talking openly about higher postage and even service reduction as options. You've been an outspoken advocate of Postal Service. Tell us what you're seeing, especially in the rural areas that you represent.
Well, what I would say is the importance of universal service. And I think that's a really important distinction. I think there's a real tension between, is the USPS to operate as a business or is it there to provide a universal service? I very much, in my Postal Service caucus that we've established in the House of Representatives, believes in the foundation of a good United States Postal Service is that it does provide universal service. What I mean by that is no matter where you live in this country, whether it's an urban, suburban, or rural community, you can have reliable, on-time, first-class mail be delivered to your home. And I represent one of those districts that has a lot of rural components and communities in it. And I can tell you that seniors in rural communities are relying on on-time mail delivery to deliver their prescription drugs. I still have a lot of constituents that have their paychecks that arrive by mail. So I think what was really a unique opportunity to have Postmaster General Steiner come before the Oversight Committee. I was excited to get the chance. We call it waving on. I don't typically serve on that committee, but because of my special interest in the Postal Service, I did, to just ask him questions about, he's immediately jumping to, we need to raise the prices on postage. I would actually argue, I think we need to take a step back before we increase costs immediately to postage. We know in 2022, the last time there was true, really large, comprehensive postal reform, through that reform process, there was about $60 billion worth of savings that was found through that reform process that really helped on the financial solvency questions as it relates to the USPS and maintaining that universal service. I think we should be looking at creative ways for us to look at reforms. How can we save money before we pass increased cost on to consumers who, I could tell you, in a district like mine where we've seen challenges with more on-time mail delivery rates, it's really a hard sell, I think, to folks to say, I'm not getting my mail on time and now you want me to pay more. I think we should be working together to try to find reforms. What I mean by that is, how are we helping to improve our on-time mail delivery rate so we can increase volume? Increasing volume is going to help with the solvency of the financial situation of the USPS. And then lastly, Terry, I'll just mention too, I think a reform we should be looking at is giving more flexibilities around pension investments and things like that I think have been very rigid and have tied the hands of the United States Postal Service to take some outside of the box, kind of look at the flexibility of their investments to maybe save some money and then not immediately raise costs.
We have certainly, for recent memory, treated postage as the way that the USPS raises its operating funds. If we don't raise the money here and there aren't enough cost savings from internal operations, would you be thinking of an alternative financing mechanism for them?
Well, I think that, I don't want to completely take off the table the fact that we might get to a place where we've looked at all the reforms, and maybe we do need to consider making the case as to why a postage increase is necessary for the solvency of the USPS. So it's not that we should completely rule that out, but I think we should look at every other option first. And so I do agree, kind of what you're suggesting is, more flexibility that the USPS can have around their investments. One of the things that happened in 2022 with reforms was the way they looked at the healthcare financial obligations for postal employees, whether that needed to really be front-loaded or if that's something that could be kind of more spread out, helping to relieve some of the financial burden. I think we should look at things like that. Have we finished that work now around those types of flexibilities? Again, increasing volume. I have a lot of, as you know, concerns around the Delivering for America plan, and that because of that plan, I think we're seeing in response to that lower on-time mail delivery rates because of the consolidations of those distribution centers and the way the RTO plan, the way the mail is going out. If we could figure out how to fix and improve our on-time mail delivery rate, that too increases volume and gives us a better footing to make the case for the USPS to consumers.
I'm speaking with Congresswoman Nikki Budzinski. She represents Illinois' 13th Congressional District. Well, Congresswoman, let's take that reality that you've just described, challenges with on-time delivery, challenges with volume, challenges with cost, and overlay that with elections. Mail-in voting has been in the news quite a bit lately. Putting politics aside for a minute, where does the Postal Service need additional resources in order to handle the ballots while it's already under this kind of financial pressure?
Well, we need to be supporting the workforce. I mean, one thing I didn't highlight at the top of our piece is just the shortage of staff that we have. And I would also say the burnout from the postal, whether it be a mail handler or a letter carrier. They've been on the front lines since well before COVID. You know, they themselves are seeing one of the bigger pieces of federal legislation is how are we providing protections in the workforce for them? They're seeing an increased amount of assault. So I think supporting the workforce is one thing that is really critical to ensuring that we're getting our ballots out and ballots are being returned. We have a healthy USPS that's supporting that. You know, I'm very disturbed by, and trying to put the politics aside, but to just call this out, the executive order by President Trump was certainly very alarming. What his executive order would do is actually empower the Department of Homeland Security to almost come up with a curated list of citizens that are eligible for mail-in ballots. And, you know, in a state like Illinois, we have permanent vote by mail where you can actually opt in to always receive your ballot in your mailbox and have it returned. That's created a lot of great flexibility for people that are working to ensure that they have their rights to vote. Then you look at other states in the West like Washington State, Oregon, that have moved to 100% vote by mail. So with the president's executive order, my concerns around it obviously is one, nationalizing elections, using mail-in ballots as a rationale for why he needs to nationalize elections. States have the specific authority to do that, and they've created and well-utilized vote-by-mail programs. So I do think that executive order is a direct assault on the ability to vote by mail. There's been a very controversial federal legislative piece, the SAVE Act, that he's been trying to muscle through Congress. I think if he sees that as something that's not going to work, this executive order might be the other thing that he's trying to impose on people to scratch his itch. But it's very deeply concerning. And I've led a letter. I'm working with some of my other colleagues to speak out against that and what it means for vote by mail.
What does it mean for the postal workers who would have to sort who could get a ballot based on that list? We just talked about how short they are in people and funding. Yeah. Could they even execute that mission?
I think that's a very good question. I think it's creating more bureaucracy. And so we don't have a workforce that can necessarily respond to that additional bureaucracy. The other pressure that I didn't mention is some of the controversy that happened at the end of last year around the postmark. So we are trying to actually encourage constituents in my district that utilize vote by mail that if you come up to a Friday and you still have your ballot in hand before a Tuesday election, we're really telling folks you got to drop it off at a drop box or go into an early vote site, because really no longer can you just bank on that being postmarked before that Tuesday election. And so that also is another thing that is changing the dynamics of vote by mail.
As Congress weighs postal reform, pricing, and governance questions, what's the red line for you? What must be protected to make sure that USPS can handle both everyday delivery and high-stakes responsibilities like elections?
It's my belief in universal service. Universal service is critical to, I think, the way we look at and believe of the United States Postal Service as a public service for all communities, not just communities where it can make a profit, but for our rural communities that otherwise our private sector partners in mail delivery would not have the financial ability to deliver mail regularly to our rural communities. So what I would say my bright line is protecting that universal service obligation that the USPS has to all constituents and communities across this country.
I've been speaking with Congresswoman Nikki Budzinski, who represents Illinois' 13th Congressional District. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.